Hi everyone, welcome to Boston New Technology. I'm Chris Requena, one of the organizers. Alex Benchak is also here helping me just go on the stairs right there if you have any questions. Feel free to walk from above as well if you want. There's plenty of room up there, I see. So this event is going to be a short presentation on mobile strategy 101, and we'll have a Q&A session after. So I'll ask that you hold on to your questions till that point in time. And we'll also have 1-minute pitches from all the exhibitors who are here. And I'd like to thank NewODB, one of our sponsors, also Mobinett Interactive is here. I've invited Vikar up here to speak for just a couple minutes for NewODB.
tongue-tied. Great crowd here tonight. Thanks everybody for coming out. NewODB, just a brief minute on NewODB here. We're a new SQL database without compromise. I think the homepage kind of says it all. It's the safety of SQL, scale-up performance, and zero downtime, and you can pretty much deploy us anywhere. So, for anybody who's building a mobile application or a web scale application, think about using NewODB. Imagine your customers when they wake up in New York and they connect to your mobile apps, and you give them a super fast, responsive user experience because NewODB is deployed in a data center in New York. So their applications are connecting to the most responsive systems. And then as time goes on and people wake up in Chicago, they can connect to a single logical database that now exists in both New York and in Chicago. And then a couple hours later, when they wake up in California, they can now connect to a database, the same database that they connected to in New York and Chicago in California. So we essentially move the data to where your customers are to give you a super fast, highly responsive user experience. We give you the flexibility of those SQL databases with the safety of SQL and ACID guarantees. So if you guys are building a next generation app, mobile app, or if you're thinking about taking down Facebook, definitely try out NewODB.
Thank you, Vikar. So again, we'll have a talk here about mobile apps or mobile strategy, and then we'll have the exhibitors come up probably around 7:45 or so, and each speak just briefly. So with that, let me just bring up my presentation here. So again, I'm with Mobinett Interactive, and we are a strategy design and development firm based here in Cambridge. You can contact me, and this slide will come up at the end as well if you need my contact information. Mobinett is our Twitter handle, and CE Requena is my handle. And again, BNTMOB, if you share on Twitter, that'd be great. So what do you notice from these pictures? What's different from 97 to 2013? Do you notice all, maybe it's hard to see from back there, but do you notice all the little lights in the bottom? So those are everybody's smartphones. So we're in the middle of this mobile revolution, as you all know, I'm sure. But it's pretty dramatic to see how things have changed over time. Here we are, this is a chart where pretty much all analysts are saying we're in a time period right now where we're switching over, where mobile internet is going to overcome the desktop internet. So that should be happening probably right around this time, or certainly by next year. This is a breakdown of internet access in the US by device type. So either computer, you can see kind of trending down over the last few 6-month periods, smartphones trending up, mobile phones up from 33 to 43%, and then also tablets also steadily gaining ground up to 17% in the last 6-month period reported here. And then finally, this graph shows feature phone and smartphone shipments worldwide between 2008 and then, of course, projections through 2020.
And by 2020, we'll have over 5 billion smartphones in use in the world, and probably less than 2 billion feature phones. So you see the blue is the feature phones that's trending down, and the darker one is smartphones. So what does this all mean for the business world and the consumer world? Well, the short answer is that companies in general need to go mobile. They need to be on mobile to engage the consumers and business prospects that they want to attract. So now I'll just step back and tell you just a little bit about Mobinett Interactive. Again, we do strategy, design, and development here in Cambridge, and we were founded in 2010. We have experience delivering over 20 different applications, backends, websites, mobile webs, and we serve startups as well as large companies. So we follow this approach, starting with strategy, moving on to design, development, and then deployment and marketing. And here, we're just going to focus on the strategy part of this process that we follow. So what are the mobile strategy inputs that you need to look at? The brand's goals, customer needs, and the marketplace environment. Of course, that includes business technology and economic conditions that are present. And of course, that will vary depending on where your target prospects are. So we'll go through some of the basic steps and things you need to consider and look at when you're looking at your mobile strategy. The first kind of big task you have is you have to do a lot of research and information gathering, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Secondly, you want to understand your customer journey, how mobile fits into that, how it may need to change to fit mobile. And lastly, create your roadmap of where you're going to go. So, for example, what kind of technology you're going to start with, what platforms you're going to support, what kinds of devices you're going to support, things like that, and when that will happen. So, considerations for strategy. I think does this flip all work? Does this work? Okay, I think it's on now. I can walk around a little easier. Sorry, I meant to step back here. Okay, so your goals for mobile, are you trying to make sales? Are you just trying to create awareness? And you need to focus your strategy around what those goals are. Next, market. Who are you trying to reach? Sorry, I think it's not quite working. Is it better down here? What do they want and need, your prospects? What are your competitors doing? How can you be competitive and have your own differentiation? What tactics are available? Maybe what kind of technologies you can use, approaches you can use, services that are out there, open sources, developing all the time. So there are a lot of tactics, and then the content and resources that you already have that you can use in your mobile apps. So you probably have blog content. You may have media content that you want to highlight in your apps to let people access that content and engage your brand. So when we look at mobile tactics, first, how valuable is a certain feature to your customers? You need to prioritize so you can rank them on many different methods. You can develop a pretty involved ranking system. How instrumental are these tactics or features going to be in achieving your brand goals? How cost effective will they be to implement? Sometimes that's a much more important factor, especially with startups, than larger corporations. How much of a competitive advantage will it give you? Are you going to be the only service doing this kind of thing? And so it's really worth your while to do it. So we talked a little about the customer journey. So here is just an example of a sales funnel. This one shows, awareness, where you may have some engagement through 2D barcodes, mobile display media, basically ads in apps that your customers may be using, or prospects, mobile search, that's paid search, or could be organic search. And then, going down the line, maybe once they're engaged, they may sign up for SMS alerts. They may come to your website and download your apps. You may be able to give them coupons. Later on, they become a more loyal customer once they've been using your mobile apps consistently. Generally, a loyal user will still be there after a couple of months. They'll use the app at least 3 times, and that will be considered, a mobile app user. Let's see. So this is mobile internet. What do people use smartphones for versus a browser? So for shopping, people use their browser more than their mobile phones right now. Actually, this is a little bit old. It's almost a year and a half old maybe. But these numbers, they're changing over time. So this will help you decide, okay, if I'm building a shopping-based website, or service, what's going to be more important? To put out a mobile app or to put out a website? So it's probably going to be a website. That would be where you want to start in most cases. But then, every situation will be different. For search, again, most people searching from their browser, but mobile search is growing all the time. Entertainment, still a little bit more on the browser side. Then other, business tasks, navigation, of course, when you're out and about, you're on your mobile device, you're going to be using that more for directions than the desktop browser. And social networking is also people are very active in social networking on these devices. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about the web or mobile web versus native app development. So there are advantages and disadvantages of each of these. So mobile web we'll look at, and this has some issues with browser fragmentation and support for so many different browsers that are out there. HTML5 is not necessarily implemented the same way in all these browsers. They can be slow, they can be reasonably fast, but compared to native apps, they're slower. They usually require internet connection. Apps can be made to work offline a lot more easily and effectively than a browser application. And then you have limited access to device APIs, so whatever that particular browser supports, you can tap into. But again, the browsers will be different and have different support for the phone APIs, depending on which one you're using. Then there's limited integration with other applications. So if you're navigating a website, it will link you to other websites quite easily, of course. But in most cases, you can't link to content inside of an application. There's some ground being made, especially on Android, to link web content to apps and point to apps. It's much easier. Apple has kind of locked that down pretty much in controlling everything. Then also you have easier sharing and viewing of content. Of course, people will just get the link and they go to that website and they can see it. They don't have to download an app. And of course, it's less expensive than developing native apps. Now on the native app side, you see the flip side of most of these, less fragmentation. There is more fragmentation on Android, although
charts on what these OSs look like as far as the fragmentation. Native apps, again, better performance, easier to implement caching, as we discussed, offline use, full access to the device APIs. On an iPhone, there's hundreds of APIs you can tap into, same on Android. You can launch and share with other apps, to maybe a small degree on iOS, but more so on Android, which is great. I love it. I love being able to configure and choose which apps I want to use for certain tasks. Limited sharing of content within apps. So again, when you're sharing content, you're generally sharing a link to a website somewhere, or it could be a link to download the app. But yeah, if you're downloading the app, you're not getting the content right away. So that's an added step. You get exposure in mobile app stores. Of course, Apple has an app store, Google now has Play, Microsoft has its own store as well, and they feature and highlight applications of all different kinds, every week, and that can help you get a lot of visibility. If you make it to the top or become featured somehow, then it's much easier to stay up there and keep that traction versus, being down below and trying to work your way up. So you don't have these kind of advertising or visibility with websites. This is a worldwide platform market share. So you want to look at this to see what makes sense as far as your target market. What devices are they using? This is broad, so if you look at Android has 75% of the market right now worldwide for operating systems. That's the kind of deep blue. So that's been a little bit fluctuating. Some of the iOS has 17% worldwide. Mostly the reason this fluctuates, where you see it go down a little bit, is because that's when the new iPhone 5 came out, the iPad Mini came out, and so they had a huge rush of sales during that time period. But then later on, different devices come out, and Android bumps up. Like right now, selling a lot of Samsung S4 devices, even S3 devices, still selling very well on Android. Now, when we look at just the US, we see numbers change a little bit. So Android has about 52% of the smartphone market, and then Apple has about 39%. So they're much closer when you look just at the US market. So then this is what we talk about, the fragmentation, so to speak. You can see there isn't really a lot of fragmentation. There's really three big pieces of the pie here that most developers and brands releasing mobile apps will support. These three, Jelly Bean 4.1, 4.2, ice cream sandwiches, the 4.0, and then the older Gingerbread 2.3 still have a lot of places out there. But what you'll see is that these operating systems will tend to live for about 2 years, because that's when people upgrade their phones. So, once Gingerbread is 2 years old, it'll look more like Eclair or Froyo at that point. And then on the iOS side, similar thing is, you can see later operating system versions, 6.0, 6.1, having the lion's share of this market. And if you look at the smaller ones, iOS 5 is only 5%, or actually, yeah, it's only 5%. No, I think it's the 12%. Sorry. So this is kind of dying out, and you see the newer versions coming out. It's a little bit less fragmented, especially if you can only support one. You've got 53% right there. But iOS 6, 6.0, 6.1, 6.1 are all pretty similar, so it's not a difficult platform to support. It's certainly less fragmented than Android.
Now another thing you can look at is revenue. And these are just general figures, but if you see the iOS App Store has much more revenue and much more downloads than the Google Play market here. This is from Q4 2012 versus Q1 2013. So iOS is the blue, and Android is the sort of orange color there. So I mean, you can see Android is still growing, but it's got a long way to catch up with iOS. The iOS users tend to be a little bit more affluent, and they spend more money on their devices. They use the devices a little bit more. They're more loyal app users. So even though they have a smaller share of the market, they're making up for it and much more by being more active and spending more on those platforms, on the iOS platform. But of course, that's across iPhones, iPods, and iPads. Here's just a sort of overview of development options that you can go through. There are these do-it-yourself, what you see is what you get kind of approaches. I think ViziApps is over here. They should fit into this. It's a very easy service to use. Inexpensive, but not a lot of scalability, not a lot of customizability. Then the further you go over to the right, you're getting more access to all the device APIs, technologies that you can use. You get SDKs. You do have some developer costs, licensing costs, and such. Cross-platform networks, so these are the Appcelerator, PhoneGap, Homey is another one. That makes it possible to develop one code base that you can deploy across multiple platforms. And then the fully custom is just what we call the native approach, and you're developing on iOS, without limitation, or you're developing on Android and you have no limitation. But again, the cost is higher. And then I just have a little information here about getting started with iOS and Android. iOS requires you to develop on Macintosh. On Android, you can develop on really any type of computer, Mac, Windows, Linux. Use the Eclipse, or usually develop use Eclipse as the development environment. On iOS, you have to use Xcode, which is provided by Apple, so it's fine. The developer fees are a little bit different, and you have different test frameworks, and of course, different languages that they're based on. iOS is Objective-C, and Android is based on Java. Okay, so at this point, I just wanted to give a quick demo of an application that Mobinett has developed very recently, and this is going to show you some augmented reality, where we use augmented reality to show you things. Just a moment. So this is actually a mural that we bring at larger scale events. It's kind of like a big poster, and it's just for demonstration purposes. We have this application where you bring up an application and it has a camera view, and you just focus it on whatever product or image, and it comes up with some content that we can customize. So when we have this, we can play a video, we can play music, we can just show some text information. I know it's hard to see because it's pretty small, but it overlays some images that you can tap on. They're buttons basically, so you can see some content. This is just showing some information about our process, our products. This is our Hubengate product. I'm actually discovering things and getting points for discovering things here and tapping on things. So we gamify this experience to let retailers reward customers who come into their establishment, go through this kind of scavenger hunt process and learn about their products, and then they can offer some reward, coupon, or freebie of some kind for customers going through that kind of thing. But it's a great way to engage customers and let them discover on their own in a fun way about your product and services. And another scenario where this is great to be used is in a museum setting. So let's say you have an iPad or even an iPhone. You can scan something and then you can tell all the information about it, the history about, let's say, a painting or sculpture. Maybe you could bring up a Wikipedia page or different things like that, and you can kind of discover things as you go along through a museum or any other kind of establishment. And then just wanted to wrap up here, and at this point I can take questions. Brad?
So what's your thoughts on when you're developing for one platform versus both? Or multiple, I guess, at that point.
Well, what we usually recommend is that our clients choose and focus on one platform to begin with. So it's often mobile web or iOS, and not necessarily supporting all device sizes either, right? You may be just supporting smartphone size, not necessarily having an iPad version available or anything. But what we do is we work out all the kinks and usability issues with applications on one platform, and we stagger development of any subsequent platforms the client wants to provide or support. So often we may have an iOS app in development, and then staggered 1 or 2 months after that, the Android version of the app, which can more or less be a clone of the iOS version or vice versa, but there's different navigation patterns that are supported and encouraged to be used on each platform. Yes? Yeah, well, Amazon kind of gets around that because I think they force everyone to buy everything through the mobile web. So instead of buying it through the Kindle app on iOS, they sort of make it go around so you don't have to pay those extra fees. So there are different things that you can do. It's just, it affects your user experience, and you want to have a great experience so that people are consistently using your app, and if they don't install it, you can't send them push notifications. You can't really engage them unless you have an email address maybe you've collected. You can do that, but you want to try to create the best experience you can so that they give you good ratings, which will help you get more users, but also push them down that sales funnel if that's part of your program. Yes?
Which mobile technologies do you think are most exciting for the industry?
That are being what right now?
Being developed right now?
Developed?
Or on the verge of mainstream?
So I don't know if everyone heard the question, but he was asking about what exciting technologies there are that are sort of coming out right now or coming soon, let's say. So augmented reality is one that's been out probably for a long time, but there's kind of new ways to apply it at this point. So we make it into a whole experience. As I showed, I couldn't really see the device, but what we're doing actually with that is we're going to implement a Google Glass version. So I don't know if you heard about the Google Glasses, but you put them on and it has a tiny little screen up in the top right of your field of vision. And so what you could do is, let's say in the museum example, you're walking around and something pops up because it sees, you know, a sculpture or a painting or something, and it says, oh, you know, this is from this year and by this person, or, you know, whatever content, you know, the museum thinks will be informative and engaging for visitors, you know, they can put that in there. Yes?
Is it more two-dimensional recognition, or is it more like location combined with this? Just curious.
Well, when we present content, there are a lot of factors that we can, you know, put into the mix. So it's not necessarily just image recognition or object recognition, but it can also depend on their location, time of day, even, you know, the day of the week. I mean, there's all the different kind of parameters that you look at for targeting consumers. Those can all be incorporated into some kind of algorithm to present content.
So to answer your question, it can be 2D or 3D. It can be 2D or 3D. So it depends on what you want to recognize, and so you can make a 3D object out of it. So then you can take a model and you can turn around the camera, and it will recognize that. You can make a 2D layer. So you have the flexibility of doing 2D and 3D.
This is our CEO, Touch Team. Why don't you come up here in case there are more technical questions? Yes, right here.
I have two questions. The first is, in your experience, when you develop applications for different platforms, how much can be leveraged from one development to the other? I mean, how much can you reuse when you port an application from, say, iOS to Android? That's the first question. And the second one is, when using information for the augmented reality, did you connect to things like Facebook to use your likes from your friends, or things like from the user factoring the augmented reality to, or it's just location and time of day?
So the first question where you asked how do you port between different apps, right? If you're using a platform which is a cross-platform solution, so you can develop on PhoneGap. You can develop on PhoneGap or Titanium, and there are a lot of cross-platform tools that you can write code on, right? If you use a platform like that, then pretty much all your code is portable. So you write in one language, which is whatever language they specify, and it compiles the code for either Android or Objective-C. Typically, again, if the apps are complex, we don't recommend that approach, because again, anything that you use cross-platform, it's great for simple apps, but as the UIs get fancier, as you add more, features into the app, it becomes messy. But if you do native, then you can't port anything from one platform to the other. The algorithms, whatever you're using, but again, if you look at the architecture itself, Android and iOS architecture is more or less the same. And again, I don't know how, if you've seen iOS 7, so it's pretty much copied from Android, right? So both are copied from each other at every given point in time. And at some point, you'll find no difference between both the operating system except the colors. What's happening on the back end, even from a code point of view, the architectures are getting more or less similar. Like how you use the app, how you go from one screen to the other. So all of those layers you can reuse when you port the apps. And again, it's also, I think the key thing is when you develop on one platform and move to the other, as Chris was talking about, you can learn from what users on the first platform, then port that to the next. Your second question was adding personalization to augmented reality. That's what we focus on. There are a lot of AR SDKs available right now. So there's Google Goggles, there's one from Qualcomm, there's one from Intel. So there are a lot of AR SDKs that are out there, right? But what they help you do is they help you recognize the object. What is really useful is the hyper-personalization that happens on top of the object. So what we can do is, the example Chris gave, you're walking in a retail store, and we know who you are. We know what products you have scanned before, and we know which kind of stores you go to, what you do, and so on. So we can use all that information. Where our technology comes into play is using all that information, personalizing the layer that Chris showed on top of the real world objects. So when you point at an object like that, the information you see might be different from the information the person next to you is seeing.
Because it would be, I'm just thinking that it would be very cool to be able to look at a product and see what my friend's opinion is.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you give out your information, we can show you whatever you want. So that's where the fine line is between privacy and, for example, Google goggles right now, they have banned, Google glasses, sorry, they have banned facial recognition. So we cannot use Google glasses to recognize people, which becomes a privacy issue. I can wear the glasses, I'll be looking at you, it will give me your entire history. Right? So there are a lot of privacy issues that come into play in all these technologies, and a lot of other legal issues as well. So again, the key is to tackle not just the technology, but all the other issues around it as well.
Also, just quickly, when you look at integrating social media, I mean, we do that in a lot of our apps, but again, you have to look at the user experience. You know, you want to force them to give you their Facebook credentials. Is it really, worth it, so to speak? Some people are scared of that, or they don't want to bother, they just want access to their content, or they just want to provide maybe their email address and that's it. So, you need to weigh these sort of tactics or features against how good of a user experience you can provide. Is there a question on here? Yes.
Could you speak to that, and also, I mean, as a user, I'm often that signing up for something either via LinkedIn, like Google account or Facebook account. Do you have any stats on or just use my email address? What do people do? And is it different in a desktop environment versus an app environment?
No, I mean, what the information that you get is, again, it's totally app specific. So let's say we are requesting some information from Facebook. We can request different sets of information, and again, that's totally dependent on what the app needs.
How likely would you provide access to Facebook?
Yeah. No, it's not different on the web or the app. We can fetch, it's the same APIs, we can fetch the same information on both the web as well as the mobile. So whatever information you need, you ask for it, and again, the user has to give approval, and we can fetch that information. But typically we tell people not to ask for more because it just scares away users, right? Like if you open the app and then you see your entire history is being downloaded, you'll close it. So we only request the information that's really necessary. And as users get comfortable with the process of using your app, as they like your app, then you can start asking them for more and more information. So that's what we do. But yeah, there's more difference, and you can, now you can pretty much take any person and you can write a biography of that person just by Googling or going on Facebook. So there's a lot of information out there about you.
Yes, right.
Yeah, I was just curious as to what challenges you see forthcoming in the next six months to a year for mobile development, or if not, what has you scratching your head at night?
Well, again, I think for us the biggest change is iOS 7, and I don't know if you've read a lot of reviews about iOS 7. It's good for developers like us because it's changed completely, which means that all the apps on iOS 6 have to be rewritten or redesigned to work on iOS 7. So for developers it's good, for the app owners it may not be a good thing. But again, I think the key thing there is it's going to redefine Apple in the next year. So far, a lot of people have been loyal to Apple for two reasons. One, their devices were good. Two, there was not a whole lot of change between one version to the other version. But once you install iOS 7, it will be a whole new experience. So it's as it's equal to you buying an Android phone and using Android, right? So I think that in the next year we'll know how Apple will tackle that challenge and where iOS, it's a make or break for iOS 7, for Apple. iOS 7 is a make or break for Apple. That's what we think. I think the other technology is Google Glasses. Everyone's talking about that, and wearable computing. Apple has already registered patents on iWatch. Google has some patents on it. There's a watch called Pebble, which is selling really well. It's not a smart watch, but it's an accessory that you can connect to your phones. So wearable computing is going to change in the next 5 years. It's going to totally change how you interact with your devices. So again, that also ties into the computing power of all these devices. So to recognize all these visuals like augmented reality, to recognize voice and so on, you need powerful computing. And as the processing power on these devices grow, then these technologies will take over, and the device will become smaller, and you can, it'll change the way you use smartphones. You may not call them smartphones.
What are the main differences that you see in iOS 7 in terms of access, in terms of the APIs? Do you see any opportunities there of Apple? They did change quite a few things. Do you see any opportunities in being able to make your apps more accessible, accessing more of the device, different APIs? Like, what's most exciting for you into iOS?
Well, iOS 7, I don't find anything exciting about iOS 7 because they just copied Android. So I think that's the biggest reason people were disappointed, because Apple is not innovating anymore, right? So if you look at iOS 7, all or most of the features that you see on iOS 7, you find it in Jelly Bean. And so I'm not like totally excited about iOS 7 in terms of the features that it offers. It's still the same as Android. But again, from an API standpoint, it's still the same APIs. I mean, there's not a whole lot of. They have changed the API layer, which also means the design and how screens transition from one place to the other, how apps run in the background, how we can bring it. But in all these things, they're essentially copied Android. So it's nothing like totally innovative or exciting. I mean, for a hardcore iOS user, yes, if they have not looked at Android, they'll be, oh wow, iOS 7. But if you have looked at all these different operating systems, then there's no wow factor there.
Question? Yes.
Do you see the iOS 7 being similar to the Jelly Bean? It could open more the Android app market to the Apple side.
Yeah, so I mean, as I said, iOS 7 is copied partly from Android and partly from WebOS. I don't know if you remember, there was Palm 3, which HP bought. WebOS was a very good operating system. It was a really good operating system. Unfortunately, nobody adopted it. And HP tried to buy it and bring it back, but they didn't succeed. So if you look at even the BlackBerry 10, the BlackBerry 10 operating system, a lot of concepts there are copied from WebOS. So Apple has tried to take the best of all worlds. They've copied some from BlackBerry 10, they've taken some from WebOS, they've taken from an Android, they created iOS 7 out of it. So we'll have to see how people react. But it's a complete change in the UI, so that's why I'm saying it's a make or break for Apple. Just like Windows 8 was like a make or break for Microsoft, and Windows 8 is not selling because the start button isn't there, right? So, so things like that. So we'll see where it goes.
All right, so thank you for all your questions, and at this point we'll invite the exhibitors to come up and each give a 1 minute or so pitch. Since you're up here, why don't you get us started?
Join Boston New Technology Meetup. Sponsor an event or a venue. Present your idea and attend to network with Boston's brightest. Details are at www.bostonnewtech.org and in the video description.